Welcome back to Season 8 of the Whole Horse Podcast. I'm your host, Alexa Linton, coming to you from Vancouver Island, Canada. Thank you all for your support and listening over the last 7 years and for your willingness to think outside the box about all things horses. This season, we'll continue to push the edges of our understanding of horses and what keeps them their healthiest and happiest with the help of some very special guests, including some of my most important personal mentors. So happy to have you back and along for the ride. Let's get started. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. It's season 8 officially, and I'm really excited to start again. There is just so much to talk about when it comes to horses, well-being, horse keeping, geekiness around horses, all these things. And today, some kind of out there wonderful stuff, that the territory I love to tread into, the animal communication realms, intuitive realms, all these sorts of places. We will be going there this year as well. And I'm really excited to be sharing with you some of my favorite people, as per usual, and some of my most important people and my important mentors. So I have brought that into more and more focus this season. So I'm really excited that you're going to get to meet them. So pleased to be chatting today with Brittany Ashworth of Sacred Echoes. Welcome, Brittany.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's such a pleasure. I was like, who do I want to chat with on my holiday?
I'm honored.
Yes. And you all should know that I'm sitting here in my sweatpant hooded onesie with, the little Nordic print on it. I've just gotten out of the shower and we're keeping it casual today.
We're in full veg mode.
Absolutely. And Brittany and I are known to gab. So
Yeah.
I'm excited for you all to just have a little look in on our conversations that we've been having now for, I was trying to think, Brittany, I think it's been 11 years.
It could be 12 because I think I met you in 2016.
Yep.
Actually. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's almost, like around the 12-year mark is I think, because I think I met you in 2016.
Yeah. So it's been a minute. And when I met Brittany, she was, correct me if I'm wrong, just getting into horses. She'd adopted a off-the-track thoroughbred named Duke.
Yeah.
And was boarding in a barn across the street from where I was living with Diva. And I believe we met because you called me out for a session. Is that right?
No, we met because I had just moved to the Cowichan Valley. I was going to university there, and I came to you for body talk first. For myself.
Right.
And then at kind of the same time, Duke came. I think it was like within a couple months of each other. Like I think you and I had personally had a couple sessions, and then Duke came, and then it all kind of amalgamated into like all of us just seeking support. Yeah.
Of course. That gives me goosebumps. My memory is horrid. But that's really neat. So I had not realized that. So then meeting Duke.
Yeah.
I would love you to share a little bit, because even this morning I was thinking about what are we going to chat about on the podcast? And of course he came in and he's like, you got to tell my story. You got to talk about me. I was like, okay, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what changed there? Because just to give you some perspective, I believe at that point you were not a horse person at all. Am I correct?
No. And I think this is the thing that people don't always know. I wasn't a horse crazed girl either.
Yeah.
Like horses are the biggest aspect of my life. And I didn't grow up wanting horses. He's like this thing that fell into my life and literally changed it. Like, I sit where I am today, and I have, the reach that I have and the business that I have and all of these layers because of him. So yeah, no desire to get into horses. I mean, I was in university at that point, like no
Mhm.
desire for anything. And I was not in alternative therapies, like I was not spiritual at the time. Like he just like really snowballed me sideways
You
into this
sure did.
completely yeah, in a very interesting way. So yeah, it was not subtle. So yeah, he was my introduction to all things. And I think because of the severity of where he was, and I'll never forget, I think this was the point where I was like, oh shit, this is real. Was I think it was your very first session out for him. And one of the first things you said to me was, and meanwhile, he's having all these things, and I'm crying in his presence because he's holding so much. But one of the first things you said was that he doesn't care if he lives or dies. And he was just so broken down. And at that moment, I was like, holy shit. I've never heard an animal say that, or I've never experienced an animal saying that. And I think it was that moment that like my determination to change things for him and for him not to feel that way anymore and that not be his reality became the reason that I did everything that I did and stepped so fully into everything that he required me to step into,
Mhm.
actually, is how I would say that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, that's bringing up like some tears and
I
some
know.
wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing having a terrible memory, everybody, because it's like you live your life over and over again and at different times when people tell you like, "Oh, remember you when you said this thing?" And I'm just like, "No, like absolutely I do not." So I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, wow, that was very wise of me. Quite amazing."
That's so good.
Oh my goodness. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about Duke, what you feel he might want shared. And
Mm-hmm.
just so you all know, Brittany also has a podcast
Mm-hmm.
where she has more than likely shared about Duke if you want to learn more, and I will. Yeah, what is your podcast called again?
It's called The Grounded Communicator.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yes.
So
So you
yeah,
can
I'm sure.
go over there and
Yeah.
listen to her podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more
Um,
about him.
I think the thing that's coming up for me right now when I think about that is I think sometimes horse people don't really see the impact of what it means to pass on their horses. And he's a really good example of he was 18 years old. I was
Yep.
his 13th owner. And if you do the math on that, that's less than 2 years with every owner. And so, from my perspective and in my belief, how are you really giving your relationship a chance with a horse if that's the timeline that you have them with? And I think, even if I think about he didn't get rehome till he was 4 years old. So now we're like, the math just like doesn't add up. And I think that people don't really give their relationships with horses a chance, and people don't see the value in letting horses be in relationship with you for extended periods of time. And he really needed that. Like, I think that he and I really didn't fully have a relationship where we weren't constantly moving over hurdles until like year 3 together.
Yep.
And
Yep.
part of that was, I was new into horses. I'm very thankful that I was new into horses though, because I really was learning as I was going and I didn't have any attachment or agenda or preconceived notion of what he should or should not be doing. And I think that was really beneficial to who he was as a being. Um, but there was just so much there for him to unpack. And I really think that it's important to be willing to look at that with and for your horses. And he's a really great example of, and maybe an extreme example of what it means to truly look at what are the things we're holding? What are you trying to communicate? Understanding that behavior has information underneath it, whether we as a human like that behavior or not. And yeah, I think those are the layers that when I really think about, especially that beginning time and us coming together, like those are the pieces that I think were not seen and understood specifically for him. And as we know, we've seen happens.
Often.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it does.
I remember back to when we kind of started out together, and I actually kind of envied you this beginner's mind. I
Mm-hmm.
remember that specifically
Yeah.
because at the time I was really in a process of having to unlearn a bunch of stuff and like
Yeah.
falling back into old patterns and like really like struggling against my conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just watching you and being like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
like that is actually so great that she's just
Yeah.
starting from scratch and she doesn't
Yeah.
have all of this. She doesn't have the lens on the horse world or the training or like these
Mm-hmm.
belief systems that she's carrying around that are like, sort of instigating behavior
Yeah.
in us as human beings that like
Yeah.
becomes a reaction,
Yeah.
becomes just a reflex, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I often say like my default was always curiosity because I didn't know anything different. And at the time I look back at that and, being at a boarding facility with a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of eyes watching you, very hard. Very hard to do, especially when you don't have any horse stuff behind you. And, Duke was looking from the outside looking in, you could say he was a very hard horse. There was a lot of things that we
Yeah.
had to move through for him to even, we could even say, even want to be here, like
Yeah.
even want to engage in a relationship. And I always felt super judged for not having that background. And I felt like people were always thinking I was doing the wrong thing. And tons of people would try and give me advice and things that didn't feel congruent and right for me. And I do think I'm now so thankful that I didn't have a background in horses at the time, and he was my initiation into the horse world and what that looked like, and I'm forever thankful for all of that, even the hard stuff.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, my default being curiosity and wonder as opposed to reprimanding or, like that assertive behavior that we often see, I think has allowed me to show up with my horses the way that I have been blessed to show up. So yeah, I'm
Hmm.
very fortunate. Yeah.
Hmm. Amazing. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm sure you told me this story way back when,
Yeah.
and
That's okay.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
But how did he come into your life to begin with?
Mm. So um, at the time, my sister Brienne had April,
Yeah.
and she obviously has her daughter Autumn, and they were moving from the property where Autumn was riding, and that's where Brienne got April, and April landed, and they were in like Shawnigan Lake, so farther. And April was transitioning to be by herself at the time, and Brienne was looking for a second horse for
Right.
Autumn.
Yes.
Yeah. Autumn was like, I don't even remember how old Autumn was at the time, like probably like 5, like
Yeah.
kindergarten, grade 1. So just like, an easygoing type of horse. Anyways, so she finds Duke through whatever, probably Facebook or whatever, and she invites me to go meet him. And so Duke actually came into our life because Brienne was looking for a second horse. And we went and saw him. And at this time, even Brienne is kind of newer into horses, but I remember seeing him and just being like, what is happening here? Why is this horse being ridden? I don't know a lot about horses, but this horse does not look healthy to be ridden. This horse is like very heightened. And at this point, I didn't have animal communication, but I'm feeling all this stuff coming up in me that I didn't have before. And, um, we left there being like, we need to take him. And so Brienne ended up being the one to adopt him, steward, take him, take ownership, whatever you want to call that. And it just became very obvious off the get-go that he was my horse. And I laugh now because even looking back when we went to see him in his previous home, Brienne tried to like halter him and lead him around. And I was like, oh, I'll let them have their time because uh, you know, it's about them and this is going to be her horse. And he planted and he wouldn't move when I stopped. And so like looking back, I'm like, oh, it was so very obvious. And he came off the trailer with a head injury, like, you know,
Oh, yes, I remember that.
yes,
Oh,
because he
wow.
was very hard to load.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget. There's a lot of things I'll never forget, but this one is a standout moment to me when the trailer pulled up at the barn that we were moving him to. He's thrashing around, and I just burst into tears. There was so much sadness and so much sorrow and fear from him that like I couldn't it even makes me
Mm,
emotional now. Like I just couldn't even explain what was happening to my body when he and I came into proximity, but he came off the trailer with a huge head
yep.
injury
I remember.
and I was the only one that could doctor it.
Yep.
So even though he wasn't my horse, I was having to go there multiple times a day to like manage that. It just became very obvious that I was the only one that could like do anything with him and the only one that he was really engaging with and that when I was in his presence, he was receiving emotional stability from me in a way that he wasn't seeking out from others. And so she ended up gifting him to me. I don't even know,
Mm.
maybe a month later. Um, and her and I hadn't had the conversation. Like, I was at the point where I was like, he feels like my horse, but she's paying the bills. But I'm like, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to step on toes. And I showed up at the barn to feed one day because, like, I was so active in it. I was like doing feedings. Like, I was like doing half of everything, anyways, minus the paying of the portions. And I just like showed up and she had like written this, like, gifting him to you, like, note. And I just cried. And yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So,
Oh.
yeah, that's how he kind of again, I wasn't looking for her, so he had to like come in through Brienne. Otherwise, I wouldn't have ended up with him because I would have never thought to seek that out
Mm.
for
Oh, I
myself.
love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's like, I will find my way to
Yeah,
you.
totally. Totally. Yeah. So interesting.
Wow. Wow. And then the story continues that and this is where it gets where we get very connected
Yeah. Yeah.
because as I said before, Duke and April lived across the road and then they
Mm-hmm.
came and moved in with us with Diva.
Yes. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we had this very interesting transition of like you supporting us across the road. Like there was a time there he
Yep.
was getting weekly sessions with you. Like you were very involved. Again, you were my connection to the horse world that I was like, I can listen to what's coming out of your mouth
Yes.
and I'm not super triggered. um, and there was like that evolution of you like helping us be independent over there and then this opportunity to like leave the chaos of that and kind of come over and like
Yeah.
be with you and
In the
Diva.
paradise by the lake.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
totally. Yeah. And
Yeah.
very different. It was a very different
Very
environment and
different.
atmosphere. Yeah.
Well, I'm honored to think that I think Duke also had a level of trust with me, which,
Hmm.
allowed him to be like, okay, we can go over there.
Yeah.
Because of
Yeah.
course I was handling, all three of us were handling
Hmm.
them.
Yeah.
Um, and then, you know, you and I have this connection to Laura
Hmm.
Bird. So I started bringing
Hmm.
Laura in from Australia to teach her animal communication workshops because she's my twinsy. And if you go back in the podcast, you can hear her. And Brittany was like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
And that whole other journey began.
Yeah. I'm like, the rest is history. I think it like, I always explain it as like, taking level one turned on the light
Yeah,
bulb, like the
I saw
lights
it.
of
I
like,
was there.
yeah. And I was
Yeah.
like, it was an interesting thing because as it's happening to me, I'm being reflected that I'm good at it, and then also I'm like, but it feels like nothing happened. So I was like also searching for the thing that it was like now I feel different, even
But
though
it's
I
like,
like
no, I've
didn't.
already
Yeah,
always been like
yeah,
this.
yeah.
I think this is a
So
good reminder for everyone that like
yeah,
we all have this gift in us. And sometimes
hmm
it's just literally like a light switch going on, and that's it,
Yeah.
you
And it
know?
sometimes doesn't even feel like the light switch is turned on. It
Mm-mm.
just is like I'm more aware of the things that are already in the space in the room. And I think that's one thing that people find hard. And when people come to me and they're like in that in between phase of like, I want to be an animal communicator. I've done the things, but I'm like not willing to say that I am or like step into that. It's usually because they're looking for like the sky to open
Yeah,
and
the
the
big,
heavens to sing
"Oh."
down. Yeah, like I feel so different now. I'm such a changed individual. But like that's not usually how it happens. It's like I'm going to turn the lights on in the room and I'm given access and I can now see all the things that were already in there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
completely. I
Yeah.
know that feeling very, very
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting.
Oh,
Yeah.
and I mean, I had the pleasure of having Duke present for,
Hmm.
not just animal communication, but other workshops as well, and,
Hmm.
like, what a powerhouse,
He is.
right?
He is.
He still
And
is. And Duke,
yeah.
just so you know, is on the other side
Yeah.
now, but he is still ultra present, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say it's so funny because when I transitioned him, I was in training with Hillary Schneider
Yep.
for horse medicine leadership. And I transitioned him, I don't even remember what day of the week, but like within a week, I was going there for a retreat. And you can have these spiritual connections with your animals, obviously, and you can feel them around you always. But there was such a different quality. And I remember sitting there that first morning of the retreat, right after I had, transitioned him. And I remember feeling him over my shoulder. And I was like, this is such a different feeling. There's such a different quality to this feeling. And he was just like, this is so cool. I can be with you everywhere. And I was like, yes, you can. And it was such a different, like, it almost became the initiation of like, I'm going to constantly be there and I'm going to be constantly like support in such a different way than when he had a physical body that he was connected to.
Well, in that a
Um,
physical body that he was struggling with, right?
yes. Yeah.
Like, his
Well,
physical body had been a struggle for a very long
yeah.
time. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. I think most of his life, his
yeah.
physical body was a struggle for him. And um, because he was so emotional always, like he never really got out of how emotionally unstable he could be, things triggering him. He never really found trust in others in the same way he found trust in me. And when we moved off the island and off of your property, I moved the farthest I had ever been. He had
Mhm.
me, on the same property with him for most of our time together. And then we moved across the road. I could see him out of my windows, depending where they were on your property. And then we moved off the island, and I was 45 minutes to an hour away from him.
Ah.
And so he, in that, like, the move was amazing for him. It was so good. I think, it's very, as you know, it's very hard to have horses on the wet coast. And when
It's well
when you have
named.
a, yeah, yeah, it is. When you have a horse that struggles with body stuff, that I really realized how much weather impacted him when we moved to the interior, which is more of like a desert climate.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm forever thankful we did that. But in that, we got distance, and he never really got to a place where he fully trusted someone else the way he fully trusted me. And I think even in the end, when we were getting to a point of he was starting to tell me because he always had body stuff. From the moment I
Yeah.
got him, he had body stuff. You would look at him and you'd think it's like cruel that I had him alive and was supporting him. And that was projected on him a lot. Like,
I can
that was
imagine.
hard for people to see. And again, because I didn't have any of those layers, it didn't bother me. Um, but ultimately that was the thing that became hard for him to be in, was his body. And so when we started having those conversations, I was like, okay, what things do we need to clean up for you emotionally, energetically, before you make your transition? And I remember there was a point where I said to him, I had to have a very hard conversation, and I was like, so you either clean some of this up in this lifetime,
Where you're
or you're coming back for it, and
Mhm.
then you and I are no longer aligned. Because part of his and my contract was we were going through a lot of the same healing at the same time. And
Yep.
I didn't really see that at the time, as it's hard to do. But like looking back, I'm like, holy shit, we had so many parallels that he and I were moving through in our own trauma. And
Yeah.
I moved through that. And I was dedicated to do that for myself, and I was dedicated to doing that for him. But there's this layer where he had to be willing to do it for himself. And he and I really had to have that hard conversation. I'm like, if you're not going to move through this actively for yourself in this, you're coming back for some of those layers. And then you and I aren't in connection and in contract together, because I'm not in that anymore. I've moved through those layers. And so part of his, 6 months prior to his transition was really asking and reminding him, because he needed a lot of reminders. He would disassociate easily, and you had to ground him back into our why, of like moving through a lot of the stuff he was holding from his, at that point, I think he was 22 or 23
Mhm.
years, you know, in the world, and what that looked like.
On the earth plane. And that
Yeah.
it's so amazing. So like I want to get into that
Yeah.
piece because I mean, I think for many listeners, this might be the first
Mm-hmm.
time hearing about something akin to soul contract or
Mm.
even like looking at like agreements, like soul
Yeah.
agreements, and particularly with animals. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to really get into this because I think it's a
Yeah.
super important thing. Myself and Diva, I don't know if did I ever tell you about this animal communication that we had like when we first got together, me and Diva,
I don't
when she
know.
was
I don't know, but
4.
go for it. I want to hear it.
Oh my god, I wish I could find there is like so it was a gal that did like automatic writing for her animal communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And oh gosh, what's her name? I can't remember. Um, that's going to be our theme of the session of the podcast today. I can't remember. Um,
That's okay.
oh my gosh. Anyways, so Diva was my first horse. We met when she was 4, so 21 years ago. Totally
Mm,
nutty. And this animal communicator did this session for us, and I didn't, again, sort of like you, didn't know anything about animal communication. Was like,
mm-hmm.
what is this stuff? And she basically, Diva said, we've come together in this life in different bodies to show each other what it means to be best friends,
Mm,
to be
mm-hmm.
best friends, to be deeply caring for each other in these different bodies. And yeah, what that looks like on all in all aspects and on all levels. And
Yeah.
of course, I bawled and was
Yeah.
like, because it rang so true in me
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
what it was. Like I
Yeah.
bawled not because, "Oh my gosh, that's so sweet." No, it was just
Yeah.
something that
It's
went
truth.
straight to my heart and was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Yes." Like I a part of me knew that was our agreement. That was what
Mm-hmm.
we decided before we came,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that for me when I think of yeah, like soul agreements or soul contracts, that's kind of the quality of it is
Mm-hmm.
like this
Mm-hmm.
when you have that feeling of yes inside your body that you just
Mm-hmm.
can't deny anywhere else. It's like this, "Ooh, yeah, that is the thing." So I would love because I know this is an area that you've started to focus on and probably
Mm-hmm.
in large part because of Duke and
No, it is because
right?
yeah,
Because
fully.
of this that
Yeah.
what came up through this.
Yeah.
Like, can you share a little bit of what you consider a soul contract to be?
Yeah. I think the first thing that's really important to say is that many people have different language for this. And many people have different interpretations and beliefs and understandings around this. And what I really want to underscore is my understanding and the way that I work with soul contracts really comes from what the animals have taught me. Um, uh, Duke was the first one, and then it just really became in my awareness. So I know that there's different interpretations, and I want to honor that for everyone. Always, I don't have all of the knowledge and the only knowledge of this. So if someone knows something different, like honor that for yourself. But the way that I interpret, and I think what you shared around Diva is a really good example. I believe so when I do a soul contract session, I'm connecting with the human on an energetic level and the animal on an energetic level. And so I always say that this should feel like it's a remembering, and it should feel like it's something you already knew within you. It, again, that like that lights on thing, it should feel like the
Yep.
lights are on and you're seeing it more clearly because it's coming from within you guys. It's not something that's like coming from me and being orchestrated and I'm seeing and analyzing. It's like I'm receiving from you guys in the way that you guys want to share about this between the two of you. And so that's like a beautiful, exactly how you felt receiving that with Diva is like how it should be felt, because it's coming from within you guys. And it's very, I have found, especially with horses, it's very profound to hear your horse partner speak about why the two of you are here together and what you're here to accomplish together, and the nuances of how special that bond is between the two of you. And so, um, from my understanding and what I believe is, I think that we all have soul contracts with each other in varying degrees, humans and with animals. And so, um, you know, something that I think is often forgotten is that even when you're in a tough relate, like we could look at you and Duke, for example,
Yeah.
like there was a soul contract between the two of you guys.
Hmm.
And that's aside from what I had with me, right? There is something between the two of
Yep.
you and the two of you coming together, and potentially even the three of us coming together, that we could look at and understand why. What it is it about me being Brittany, you being Alexa, and Duke being Duke in a horse body, and you and I being humans? What is that coming together? What is the reason behind all of that? And so soul contracts to me are really looking at the why beings have come together, and why they continue to be together, the why now, the why the bodies they're in, because sometimes that is
Yep.
super informative. And if there's multiple animals, one thing I love to explore is like why the collective of animals that you have, like why are they all together and why are they
Totally.
all together with you? So,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Oh, it's just so neat to think about. Like, I'm sure you all listening out there kind of like thinking about these constellations
Mm-hmm.
of relationship in your
Yeah.
world, right? Like, and what, like, what might be true. I mean, I remember when I
Mm-hmm.
was introduced to Gwenna via a picture,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and how many of us can say this? Oh, I bought them sight unseen. I just saw a picture and I knew, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is that? I
Mm-hmm.
believe that that is some sort of soul
Soul
contract,
recognition.
soul
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
recognition.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when we went to pick up Gwenna, she jumped on the trailer, and when we even tried to get her out of the trailer, she's like, "No, thanks."
Yeah.
And you know, she's this little pony on this big trailer, can't even see out the windows, is on the ferry, and I think that maybe something's so wrong because she's so calm.
I remember having that
And
conversation
I was
with
like,
you.
"Is she okay?" It's on the ferry, usually horses are,
Yeah.
especially alone in a trailer, a little
Yeah.
tense about such things. And it just like as soon as she came home and I was like, "Oh, I get it." Like I
Mm-hmm.
just get it. And
Mm-hmm.
now watching the three of my girls together, I'm like, "Okay, maybe we need to have a session with Brittany and like really unpack this." But it's
Yeah.
so neat to like watch that little constellation do its work,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure the same is true for you when you watch your herd
Mm-hmm.
of
Well,
like,
it is.
those
Yeah,
relationships. Mhm.
totally. And I think one of the things I really want to underscore is like we have very unique coming togethers with our horses that are like very magical and profound, and but it's not always like that.
No.
Like when I got my second gelding true, it was way more easeful. It didn't feel like when I got Duke and when I got Addie, it literally felt like I had to. Like there was no options. I had to. And I remember so I got Addie sight unseen
Yeah.
as well. But I remember I kind of had to wait a weekend to get in contact. It wasn't even her owner. She was in the vet clinic to be euthanized, actually. And where I boarded, so maybe I'll just get into her story. Her story is very
Please,
interesting.
please.
Yeah.
I'm like on the edge of
um,
my seat.
yeah. So interestingly enough, I had my two geldings, and I'm like, you can be a mare or a gelding individual. I was just like content in my gelding land, and I felt another horse coming. And I instinctively went gelding. And I remember someone said to me, like, would you ever get a mare? Maybe mare energy is what you need. And I was like, oh my gosh, they might be right. So I started being like, okay, I'm like open to it being a mare. And where I boarded, the lady who ran the facility was picking up a horse who had gone in, I think she went in for dental surgery or to be scoped or something. She was in there for something, and it was a Thursday. And she was picking up, the horse's name was Zoe. She was picking up Zoe, and Addie was in the vet clinic as well. And so um, the lady where I boarded was like, oh, what's her story? Just like asking. And she was in there because she continued to colic at her previous property, and her owners wanted to euthanize her because they didn't want to pass on that type of a problem to someone else. And Marcy was the human's name, and she sent me a picture of Addie and was like, this mare's at the vet clinic. Like, would you be interested? And immediately I went into panic mode, and I was like, how do I get a hold of the clinic? How do I like get in touch? And um I think I saw Marcy the next day, and she kind of told me the story, and I could not. So the way the clinic works is like our vet clinic up here, is that whoever is the vet, because I think there's 5 or 6 vets, whoever's the vet for the horse, like you can't talk to the other vets. You have to like talk to the vet whose horse it is, and they're all partial owners. So it's like very kind of like that. And the vet was on a day off. And I was like, oh my God, what is happening? And they were like, we'll tell her to call you. Well, it went all weekend of me calling, trying to get in touch,
Oh, I
and the
can
vet not
imagine the
calling me.
anxiety.
So it was so high, Alexa. Like I couldn't focus on anything else. It was so bad. And she finally called me on Monday, and I was in the middle of teaching at the time, and I was like, I need to take this call. I had to like step out and like I was like, hello. Um, so luckily, long story short, what ended up happening is the vet is luckily intuitive. And she was like, she was supposed to be euthanized on the Thursday. She had like a student with her for like the bring your kid to work day. So she was like, I'm not going to do that with like a teenager with me. So she meant to come in the Friday, and she's like, something just told me not to, and to just wait the weekend. And so she did. And so when she heard from me on the Monday, I was like, I want this horse. Like I hadn't even met her. I'd seen one picture of her at this point, and I was like, no, like she needs to be in my life. She's meant to be in my life. So I went after work that day to meet her, and I was talking to the vet, and she was like, something just told me like not to do it, and that she was meant for other things. Meanwhile, she's now in the vet clinic for 5, 6 days, totally calm. She's cool as a cucumber. You would never know that she had been in there, and she's by herself. It's not an in and out. She's like in a stall in like a, you know, facility. And I got her backstory, and the vet was like, okay, so now I need to call the owners and tell them I didn't do this thing that I was supposed to do, and also ask if this is okay. So this was really contingent on the owners being okay with
Right.
like Addie going to someone else. And they were like, count my blessings. They were okay with it. They knew I knew about her colicking situation. We picked her up the next day in a snowstorm, and I've had her ever since, but she continues to talk, and I've never had a colic with her. She's
Oh, I was
never
gonna
had an
ask.
issue, or no, she's been like totally good. And I often say she can be a little bit flighty, like she's she's very spiritual. So sometimes I'm like, so we live on Earth, and sometimes
Ah,
you need to
yeah.
like,
So she's she's
be,
she's
yeah,
like Raven. Yeah.
yeah, 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 very much. And so when I think back to her being in a stall by herself for 5 days, I'm like, how did you do that? And she came out very unscathed. Like she was like, yeah, it was great. I had like human contact a lot of the day. And I was like, what is this? Um, and yeah, it's just like the rest is history. And she's been with me ever since. And she often talks to me about like that was her way of getting to me. And out of what she was in, because the home she was in, they collected pretty ponies and they went out on 40 acres in a very rural terrain and like drank from the river and like were not, handled and things like that. And she was like, this was my way out, and like to get into alignment of like what I'm here to do, and the way in which I'm like here to support the world. So um yeah, again, like Addie's
Wow.
another great example of like she knew what she was here to do and she was gonna get there one way or another.
It's so true, right?
Yeah.
Like I remember with Diva, like I ended up being like leasing a horse at the barn that
Mm,
her current person brought her to. And
yeah.
then this other horse had gotten like a full clip, and it was like, November on Vancouver
Yeah.
Island and pouring
Yeah.
rain. And I was like, I
Yeah.
really want to ride, but like I
Yeah.
couldn't ride this horse that I was leasing. And we did not get along. And Brigitte was like, "Why don't you ride Diva?" And at the
Yeah.
time, like my confidence in my riding was like, "She's 4, like I don't," and she's like, "She's fine." And that was
Yeah.
it. Like
Yeah.
minute I stepped that foot in the stirrup, I was donezo. And the rest, as you said, is history.
Yeah.
Um, but like these sorts of connections, right? Like where it's just amazing how it all
Mm-hmm.
comes together. And even the
Yeah.
ones like, so one that is like so profound for me was Dream or
Yeah. That's what I was
Dreamweaver.
thinking of. Yeah.
So story time. So Dream was essentially going to be put down.
Mm-hmm.
A girlfriend of mine had been called in to just kind of like take care of a few things and do a little bit of, I don't remember, but she was connected in some way. And she said, "Hey, there's this beautiful mare, but she dumped her rider and nobody trusts her and she's got a lot of trauma, and do you want her?" And at the
Yeah.
time, I had what was it? I just gotten back from something I was super, super excited about, like starting equine facilitated learning something. I was like, yes, I need a
Mm-hmm.
herd.
Yeah.
And then that all kind of fell through, but I had 2 horses and I was like, okay, this is interesting, right? Like, so I took in Dream. At the time, she was called Diamond. And, she was kind of along the lines of where Duke was, where she was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Live or die, I don't care." She was pretty done. She's pretty done.
Mm-hmm.
She'd had a lot of stuff go on in her life, had lasso marks in her neck, all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
You remember. And, oh man, did she teach me a lot about a lot of things. But it was so interesting because eventually she renamed herself Dreamweaver through a series of events. And we together, like you and Duke, went through this huge transformation process together,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
major metamorphosis.
Mm-hmm.
And initially I'd sent her off for training. She came back and then we just both realized we're not ready for this. Like we need to start from
Mm-hmm.
square one. It's where I actually learned clicker training. She was the
Mm-hmm.
reason I started doing positive reinforcement training, which I thank her for even now. And um fast forward to this day where was I just knew somewhere in me, I was like, she doesn't not want to be ridden. It's just not now. And then there was this
Mm-hmm.
day that she just presented her back to me. I've never had this happen before. She just
I
presented
have
her
full body
back to me.
goosebumps.
Like while we were like hanging in the, and she had like a halter on and that was it, and one lead rope and bareback. And she paraded me so proudly around that paddock that day. Like I can't even tell you. And then
Yeah.
there was another day we're just all sitting around because she had so many people that loved her because she was just gorgeous and she had this mama energy.
Mm.
Um, and a friend of mine was sitting on the fence who is not a horse person, and but they were very, very close. She spent a lot of time with Dream, and Dream just came right up to the fence and just this gal was very intuitive. And all of a sudden, before I even knew what was happening, she'd climbed on Dream's back. And Dream didn't have a halter on, she didn't have anything, like, she was just totally bare,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I just remember tears, like, streaming
Yeah.
down my face because this
Mm-hmm.
trust that I mean, w that she like, it was so, so
Yeah.
black and white, like, "Oh my
Mm-hmm.
god, this horse has changed so much," and then eventually she
Yeah.
said to me, "I want my own person," because of course,
Mm.
Diva's like She was my girl,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like hard to
Yeah.
compete with.
Yeah.
Um, and Dream was like, I want my own person. And then she
Mhm.
started basically haunting my friend Carmen's dreams, um, who lives in Hope, funnily enough.
Yeah.
Love that. And eventually Carmen went, okay, put her on the trailer.
So good.
And I think she was maybe 19, 20 at the time. So I did put her on the trailer, sent her on over. She arrived, like she lived there forever. And they had another 12 years together with
Wow. Yeah.
Dream Weaver as her heart horse and her guide and just like
Mhm.
just all the things. And
Mhm.
it was like my contract with her was
Mhm.
complete.
Yeah.
And this was the the when I really, really trusted
Mhm.
her and myself and our
Mhm.
clarity, it was like, yep, this is where
Yeah.
this is where she needs to be. And I
Yeah.
remember at one point I was like, well, what if you, because my anxiety came up
Yeah.
because as we
Yeah.
do, we start to second
Yeah.
guess. What if you
Yeah.
need to come back? Like we hadn't like officially like
Yeah.
Carmen hadn't officially said she's staying.
Yeah.
And Dream goes, she was very dramatic. She's like, well, just leave me here. I'd rather die. It's really dramatic. Like I
She's like, I know my destiny. It's that or
she was
nothing.
so clear.
Yeah.
Holy was she clear. And I
Mhm.
remember the other thing she was clear about, she's like, I don't want to be a dollar horse. I don't, because, here we have this thing, right? Of you give $1 to pay
Mhm.
for, a
Mhm.
free horse kind of thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I've had a few of. And
Yeah.
Dream's like, no, I'm worth more than $1. And so we did a ceremony, Carmen and I, $10. She gave me $2. I was like,
That's
Dream, is
so
that
good.
good? Are we good?
Oh, that is
And
so
then
amazing.
she was like, all right,
Yeah.
that's better than $1. This is
Yeah.
like not, symbolic, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
symbolism was so critical. And she's like Duke. She is right there on Carmen's shoulder
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
mine, honestly. She's come in a
Mhm.
couple of times. I feel like she is very, very well fitted as a fairy
Mhm.
godmother. That's a
Mhm.
real energy for
Yeah.
her. And so
Yeah.
it's really that story always just like touches me so deeply.
Mhm.
Because it was like our journey was so critical for both of us
Yeah.
and necessary
Yeah.
together. I think we were together for 2 years about, and then it was like it was just so clear. Okay, this is the
Mhm.
next step,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think very good example of like how horses can really create their reality. And I don't think humans really give enough credit to that. I I mean, we have well, 3 horses in our life in total that have like created realities that made it so that they end up where they need to end up. And um I think those are really good examples of like the reality of a soul contract and having a soul contract. And it might not always look like that, but it also can look like that. And one way or another, these pieces are going to be moved through. And what I feel really is important to underscore is like all horses in our life, even if we're a transition for them, have a contract with us. And what that looks like is vastly different and can be different. But, there was a contract between you and Dream before she moved on to Carmen to like have her completion in this body. But the time with you needed to be the time with you. There was a thing that needed
Yep.
to occur between the two of you that could only occur between the two of you.
Yep.
Think if she hadn't come to you, like life for her would have looked so different. She probably, she maybe had made it to Carmen in the end, but like who knows to what degree and in
In
what
what state?
capacity. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. She really helped me hone my skills in body talk, in animal
Mm-hmm.
communication,
Mm-hmm.
and man, did she help me with my anger.
Mhm.
That was the big
So,
one.
yeah.
That was the big
Yeah.
one because she was a fire horse, right?
Yeah.
And Diva is not that way.
Yeah.
So the the
Mhm.
the pieces that she kind of pulled forward in me, I was like,
Mhm.
wow,
Yeah.
this is the work for us, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gift between the two of you.
Oh,
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah.
It's
She's like, I'll
beautiful.
support you. You're going to support me. And then we're going to go off and do these beautiful things in the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Oh man, I miss her. She's such a
Aw.
cutie. I
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I think we're coming closer to the end of our
Yeah.
discussion today, our
Mhm.
chat. But I know you're getting into the Akashic record work, and
Mhm.
since we're going way out here
Yeah.
today,
We
I
just
mean,
might as well.
not out here for us,
No,
honestly.
no, no.
Yeah, but for some of you out
Yeah,
there listening in, maybe this
totally.
is all like, what? Oh, also
Mhm.
for Brittany, for you all, coolest podcast to listen to, the telepathy tapes.
I had a client
Yeah,
recommend them to me, and I haven't how did I not start that yet? Because she
yeah,
recommended it in the holiday season.
yeah.
But she was like, as she was listening, she was sending me messages being like, "Oh my God, the next episode." I'm like, I really need to listen to those. She recommended the same thing. So you're the second person to tell me to listen to those.
KK,
Apparently they're wild.
they are
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, so essentially, Cole's notes, a researcher hits onto this evidence that particularly in non-speaking autistic people, they are able to telepathically communicate with their loved ones as well as
Mhm.
each other
Mhm.
in like at a distance.
Mhm.
And she basically works with a doctor and researcher with like solid experimental protocol to prove
Very
this,
cool.
and it
Yeah.
is nuts. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm a
Yeah.
little mad at Patrick because he's like now like super into it and he's gone ahead.
Oh.
So now I'm like, oh, I am on my own, but
This is why, like, I have a really hard time starting things with Justin because I'm the Patrick in my
Right.
relationship. I'm like, I can't put it down. I need to keep listening. Like, it's not my fault you're busy. So I'm the one that loves to go ahead because I'm like, I can't wait at your pace. I need to know what happens next. That's so funny.
Totally,
Uh,
totally. So there
yeah,
you go. So
yeah,
as an aside, so
yeah.
before we finish up today, just like Akashic Records should not be like at the end of the podcast in the last 5 minutes, but here we
That's
are.
okay. Yeah.
So
Okay,
tell me a little bit
we'll make it
about
work.
like what got you into this and like what the heck
Hmm.
they are for people out there that are like going, what are you even talking about right now?
Yeah. So, what got me into it? I think, what kind of happened in my initiation to animal communication and my initiation with Duke was really this love for like all things spiritual and astral and out there and like what's all the things. And I kind of am always animal communication is like kind of my number one and my basis for kind of everything. And so when I'm thinking about how can I continue to learn and bring in things that are supportive, I'm always kind of asking the animals what that is. And so what started happening was I really felt connected to this other thing that I hadn't experienced before. And I felt like I was like traveling to a place in my mind's eye. And I was like, what's happening? And at this point, I had never heard of the Akashic records, had no grasp over it. I maybe had heard the word, but like it didn't land. I clearly wasn't ready to like explore them. And I was in a bookstore. Ironically, I didn't live in Salmon Arm yet, but in Salmon Arm because I was like visiting the town and um I can't remember how the book landed in my hand. Either I saw it on a sale shelf or my sister was like, "I feel like you need this." And I'm like looking at it and it's like the Akashic records and I'm reading and I'm like, "Oh my God, this is the next thing. This is like the next thing I really want to learn." And like as a lifelong learner, I'm constantly, into something new. And so this was like the next thing. And so I started reading the book because, as someone who feels education is important, I also like, I'm not going to play in something that I don't have
Yeah.
kind of training or learning in. That is really important to me. So I was like, even though I'm like connecting into this thing, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I like seeked training in it, and that's kind of how I got into it. And then it came really easy to me. I think pretty much because I was kind of already doing it in a
Hmm.
different capacity, or an unofficial capacity is how I say it. And so I got into it that way, and it's been this thing that I literally love exploring. I love going into the Akashic records. And what the Akashic records are, again, like everything, many people have many interpretations and definitions and all the things, but the Akashic records at the base are the library, if you will, of all of your soul's experiences, past, present, and future. And so when we go into the Akashic records, we are exploring, like, how I experience it is we're exploring what you are in a place to know, receive, move through, and understand. So I'm not seeing absolutely your entire soul experience. I'm seeing what your higher self and your guides are showing as important to what you're currently moving through. And so you can, I'm like, I always say you can literally explore anything in the records as long as your higher self and your guides and whoever we're met with um, are kind of willing, if you will. Willing's the wrong word, but if it's like aligned for you to explore that thing. Um, so like I've explored soul contracts in there. When I do a soul contract session, sometimes we go into the Akashic records to see the lifetimes that have come before. I have explored why someone has a pattern, and whether it be an animal or whether it be a human, like why someone has a pattern in something, why we continue to be in cycles around things. I have explored the Akashic records for businesses. How does your business want to be held? What does this want to look like? What is my purpose in this lifetime? Um, the I've had people ask about like relationships in the records, and it's always how I experience the records is we're not getting like, do this thing, follow these 10 steps. It's like they are giving you wisdom and information to move through life more easily, or to understand something differently, or to embody an energy that needs to be held, even if it's maybe challenging. It's like, this is the thing that I'm working on right now, or this is the thing that I'm being encouraged into, or it's like shining the flashlight on the
Hmm.
thing that you know is there, but you're scared to walk the path or look down. And that's where, the Akashic records can be really helpful, because it's this neutral place where we're hearing from the person or the animal or the business's like higher self. And many people have different, interpretations of what higher self is. I call it higher self because it's like the most authentic part of within you. It's like the purest part of your soul, is it's kind of how I interpret that.
Hmm.
And so we're really kind of like when you and I were talking about the soul contracts earlier, it felt like it was coming from within you. It's like the Akashic records, when we're connecting, we're getting wisdom. It's like coming from within your being, or the being that we're connected to get insight and wisdom into whatever the thing is that we're exploring. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I feel like that's a small snippet. And also, I
Totally.
always struggle to explain that. Yeah.
You did good. That was a
Yeah.
really good,
I think
yeah.
it's very out there, and it's like to contextualize it and like bring it down into a thing that someone understands, when it's like this thing you have to experience, can be hard.
Well, let's do it
Yeah.
this way. Can you give us a good example of when you've gone into the Akashic
Mm.
records, like for yourself or your
Yeah.
animals?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, you know what? The example that's coming forward is when I went in for my business, actually. And um, I think this is a good example because it really reflects what my human experience was kind of hindering for my own self.
Mm.
So when I went into the Akashic records for my business, or when I do, when I go into, I should start by saying, when I go into any Akashic records, I'm met with a scene in my mind's eye. And that scene is usually indicative of how that entity or that being wants to present.
Mhm.
So I've been met with like dragons in the forest. I've been met up in the clouds. I've been met in the ocean. But when I go into the Akashic records of my business, I'm in a forest and I'm in a circle of trees. And each tree that is surrounding me in the circle is a pillar of my business, a service that I offer. It's like, you know, like Soul Contracts has a
Yep.
tree that is representative of it, animal communication, soul contract, like it all just does. And when I first went in, the trees were very mismatchy. Like some of them were
Uh,
super small, some of them were like babies, some of them were super tall, but like very thin. Like it was very weird. And I was like, what is all this? And my higher self started giving me wisdom around this is what my human self in my fear was doing to the trees. I was not allowing them to grow to the full capacity that they could. So animal communication is a really good example. It was a pretty solid tree, but it was quite short. Like it was like
right.
height to me. And one of the things that came forward was like my fear of stepping forward in such a big way has made it so this tree can't grow. It's hit the roof of where I'm allowing it to go. And so part of my work as a human in like my life now becomes like, okay, how can I move through that fear? How can I allow these avenues of my business to flourish in the way that is meant to? And how can I continue to look within myself at how I am impacting what's actually happening out there and the energy I'm allowing things to be in.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you notice that the tree started to grow in your mind.
Yeah, so when I go in, so sometimes I go in just for a check, like how am I feeling about each of my offerings and each of my things? And from that initial time, things have really expanded and have really grown. And there's new trees in there because I am developing my business, so our circle is growing. But when I'm feeling stagnant, I will go in and be like, okay, part of my touch point is how are my trees looking? Which ones am I not nourishing? Which ones am I not spending time in? Like, where am I allowing one to like wilt away, or have I really not given the nutrients to actually take off and grow? Like, where is this? So, I've gone into the records for my animals as well. And the one time I did it, I like secluded myself in the paddock, and my eyes are closed because it's happening in my mind's eye, and I open my eyes and Addie is standing at the gate staring at me, and I was in her records, and she's like, I know what you're doing. So I've even opening the records out in the horses too, like I do that as well because it's all energy, right?
Yeah.
So they're responding to the energy that's out there. So it's been really cool to play with the records and explore in the records with people personally and in their business. And animal records are really cool because they don't have the human conditioning that often, like when we bring something, from energy in the ethers out into like, this plane, and someone has to receive the information's coming at them, there can sometimes be this resistance game where animals are really cool and they just like fully own all the stuff that comes in and comes through. So, yeah, it would have been really interesting because I learned the Akashic records after Duke's transition.
Yeah.
I often wonder when he and I were really going through the process of like, let's move through some of this,
Yeah.
had that been in the Akashic records, what the ease in that would have been for him.
Aha. Because that's what I
Hmm.
find is sometimes it
Yeah.
eases,
Hmm.
say something I'm really struggling with
Yeah.
and really in the muck with
Yeah.
on the earth plane.
Yeah.
If I kind of take it to that level,
Hmm.
all of that starts to clear a little bit
Hmm.
and I can
Yeah.
get more understanding of how to move forward
Yeah.
as what
I
my
think,
sense is.
yeah. Well, and I think with the Akashic records is like, not just with the Akashic records, I find this with energy in general, but like sometimes when something's sitting there and we don't really know what it is, once there's acknowledgement, it's like almost like, oh, it's almost relief and it's able to dissipate. And so sometimes it is like we're going into the records just for something to be acknowledged so
Completely.
that that energy can shift and it doesn't feel like it's tense and holding, and it can move out and there can be fluidity, and everything doesn't need to be so like held together.
Completely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
kind of like clearing off the lens a little
Hmm.
bit and like being
Yeah.
able to see. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
That
Yeah.
is wonderful. Okay, for anybody out there who did not know that, now you know a new thing.
Yeah.
So on that note too, I'm sure there's lots of people that are like, how do I get a hold of Brittany?
Yeah.
So tell us,
Or
how
like
do you get a hold of you?
yeah, so Instagram's the easiest way to get a hold of me. I'm on Facebook as well, but I just don't play in the land of Facebook so much. I find it cumbersome. So Instagram's the way to get a hold of me. I am Sacred Echoes on Instagram. My website is www.sacredechoes.com. And again, like I have my podcast, which is all about animal communication. So if you want more about that, that's the Grounded Communicator.
Amazing. Amazing. So yes, reach out to Brittany. She is awesome.
Thank you.
You are welcome. You are welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you for having me. I always like when you said we're hitting the hour mark, I was like, oh my gosh, already.
How
It
did
felt
that
like 20
happen?
minutes. Yeah.
I love it. We like to gab, like we said.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. So yes, thank you all for tuning in, listening for if you made it here, the whole hour and a bit. And yeah, we will see you all next time for another episode. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.